here with Neal Murthy, all-around interesting guy. Excited about our conversation today. We're going to talk about intellectual curiosity, innovation, what it's like to be an entrepreneur, and whatever else we decide we're going to talk about. Right, Neal?
Yeah, sounds good.
So thanks for being on the show. Excited to have you. And we're just going to jump right into the conversation. So it'd be great to start. Just tell the audience a little bit about yourself, whatever you want to share. You've got a great background. You've been a university professor. You've been a founder. You've been involved with hundreds of startups across your career, carried lots of different titles, been involved in lots of different interesting organizations. But just tell us a little bit about who you are and what you're working on today.
Yeah, you said a little, so I'll try to keep this short. So one of the things that a lot of people like to hear is that I actually started my first company when I was 11. And so I'll tell you the quick story behind that. And so I wanted to be a veterinarian more than anything in the world. And I was living in the small town in Connecticut. There was one veterinary clinic in the entire town and probably in the surrounding towns as well. And I was like, I'm going to be a veterinarian, but I don't know how to be a veterinarian. So I went to the clinic and I said, hey, can I just watch you and you train me to be a veterinarian? Because I thought that's how you became a veterinarian. And this guy, this veterinarian, he says, he's a really smart guy. And he says, it's a fall in New England. And he says, why don't you come on Saturday mornings? And I got about an acre plot of land. And why don't you rake up the leaves? Come at 8 a.m. We open at 9. You come at 8 a.m., rake up the leaves. And once you're done with that, my assistant will come out, check out the work that you've done. And then you can come in and you can watch me and shadow me. And we close at 2 and we end up closing everything down at 3. And I'll pay you for the whole time. And I'm like, sounds like a great deal to me. So I did that I did it for one Saturday, and then I did it for a second Saturday, and then I did it for a third Saturday. And at the end of the day on the third Saturday, I went to him and I said, I don't think I want to be a veterinarian. And he's like, why is that? And I'm like, well, I love animals, and all the animals that come in here are like sick and, ill. And I've even seen you put some of them down. And honestly, it's just heartbreaking. And I'm glad that there are people like you, but I don't think I could be that. And he's like, yeah, I kind of feel you. And then he looks at me and he says, would you like to still come and rake up the leaves? I said, yeah, that sounds good. So I kept coming back. And then I found out that a bunch of other people in town needed their leaves raked. And so I did the Tom Sawyer white fence thing. And I got all my classmates from I forget what it was, like 6th grade or something like this. And I got all my classmates and I said, hey, why don't you go and rake these leaves and I'll give you 80% of the money and I'll take 20%. So I actually built a legitimate business. We had a tax ID and everything. And it was a lot of fun. And, but that's how I got started. And so I really haven't looked back ever since. I mean, I've built, small companies and some scalable technology companies and things like this. My first professional company out of college, I built, it was a behavioral simulation company. So basically my background training was as an economist and a mathematician. And so I did my senior thesis work in what's called applied game theory. And basically what I did was I modeled how people behave and decided to make a business out of that. And was able to do that on a larger scale and for large scale clients. And it was a ton of fun and ended up selling that company to a big global professional services company. And honestly, and one of the funny things about that is that I think it was like 11 years on. So I sold that in 2006. And as of 2017, they still didn't know what they were doing with it. So, but that wasn't my problem.
Right.
That sort of thing. So yeah, I've been doing that kind of stuff. As you mentioned, I started teaching in 2003 at the University of Houston, kind of a fluke thing, and found that I really enjoyed that. And so did that on and off as an adjunct professor, which means I was just doing it part-time, class here or there, for about 15 years, different areas, like things like business economics and strategy. And then most of it was in entrepreneurship. It's a really good program at the University of Houston for entrepreneurship. And I had a lot of fun with that. So I did that for 15 years off and on, like I said, till 2018. And then I kind of stopped doing that so I could do other things, but who knows, maybe I'll go back to it as well. So, but yeah, it's kind of like just a hodgepodge of stuff.
Well, you've been around entrepreneurs for much of your life. You've been one. You've sat in that chair and been in those shoes. I'd be interested to kind of get your take. I mean, really interesting kind of mix of experiences, and you're working on a number of different businesses now, which we'll get into. And so kind of want to get your take on just kind of entrepreneurialism and how generally entrepreneurs think about the world differently. Kind of your take. You've studied human behavior and the impacts on innovative thinking and community building and those kinds of interactions. And so maybe if you could just spend a couple of minutes of talking about some of the things that you find particularly interesting and that have sort of standed the test of time, withstood the test of time, if you will, that seem to have kind of proven themselves out again and again.
Yeah, I mean, I'm happy to talk about it. I don't know that I have a whole lot of wisdom around that. It's one thing I'll say is that I think that a lot of people that are not in entrepreneurship, and there are probably a lot of people who are in entrepreneurship, think of entrepreneurship or being an entrepreneur as I don't know how to describe this, as a thing, like it's a profession or something like that. And I don't think that it's so much that as it is a mindset. And I think that virtually everybody can have an entrepreneurial mindset. And I don't know that I can be properly analytical about this and like really kind of delineate what it is to have an entrepreneurial mindset, but it's inclusive of things like going out there and knowing that you're going to put something out into the world that isn't perfect. There's a turn of phrase that I like and I've heard others use that says, if you're an entrepreneur or startup or whatever, and what you put out is perfect, then you're putting it out too late. It's about that willingness to do something and to put yourself out there and to put your products out there or your business out there in a way that is less than perfect. And that's really important because it's through that process that you also learn more and make that thing better. I think that that's really important. It's also, and this kind of goes along with that. I think it's also about, you have to be willing to take a certain amount of personal and professional risk. And frankly, and you talked about study of human behavior. Most people are not. I don't know if it's what you're born with or just how you're raised. I'm not going to answer that question, but most people are just generally risk averse. We live in a society, especially in the United States, but we live in a society in which we're trained to be kind of generally risk averse. There's stuff that you do and there's stuff that you don't do, and there's certain liabilities attached to that. But in addition to that, we go through like an educational system, and that educational system is here's some information, and then I'm going to ask you a question, and then you're going to give me an answer. But that's not the way the world works. And that's certainly not the way that entrepreneurship works. Nobody gives you the question. You're actually out there seeking the question. And that's the case for a lot of professions, but entrepreneurship is one of those paths for which that's, I think, very real. So you have to be willing to go out there and seek the questions and then seek to answer the questions in ways that are less than perfect and take risks associated with that. And I don't think that most people, I'm not saying most people aren't suited for that, but I don't think that most people, that's who they are intrinsically. And so they have to overcome that, that risk aversion to go out there and be maybe what they want to be. But I honestly think that that's also the case for a lot of other things too. It's just, it's a big challenge in our world to find who you are, and just explore our society, or explore, and maybe the greatest exploration is the exploration of self-awareness and finding out, who you are at your core, and then finding a way to sort of manifest that in the world, be that person. That's a really, really difficult thing. And again, that has nothing to do with being, for example, I mean, it's related, but it's not solely about being the originator of a business, a founder, right? That's not about that. Again, it's about an entrepreneurial mindset. So you can be that person and work for a large corporation, or you can be that person and be an artist, or you can be that person and be a professor, or whatever it is. You can be that person and be, somebody who works in manual labor because that's what you enjoy, or that's what you know how to do. But exploring that for yourself and finding that who you are, and then being willing to take the risks to be that person better.
Kind of that mentality and willingness to look at the world through a bit of a different lens.
Absolutely. And it's really, really hard. I've mentioned the kind of the schooling system and such, but it's really hard because I don't think that our society, the American society, in terms of what we might think of as actual entrepreneurs, those who actually create businesses and such like this, it's done a very, very good job, better than probably any other society on earth, to cultivate that. But it still doesn't do a good job of it. It doesn't do a great job of it. We put up barriers and constraints for people to find themselves and to express themselves and things like this for virtually everybody. And so to overcome those societal limitations and the constraints and the expectations and things like this is, I think, a really, really difficult thing. There's this, those of you who are listening and not you can't see me, but just to let you know, I'm a brown-skinned individual. My family is originally from India. My parents were born in India. My brother was born in India. I was born here in Dallas. But being an Indian American, especially somebody who is a sort of upper middle class or kind of higher social strata or whatever, socioeconomic strata, there's an expectation of what career path you're going to take. And for me and my family, that what I always tell people is, there were 3 career paths that were available to me. I could be a doctor, I could be an engineer, or I could be a disgrace to the family. and that's the way it is for a lot of people. We're a nation of immigrants. And the world is just a world of immigrants. I mean, a lot of people are immigrants just wherever they are and wherever they come from. And they have their certain societal and cultural expectations that come from family expectations and whatever the societal structure that they're in and things like this. And just to overcome those things is a huge challenge for anyone. But I will say that I think that I feel like I have sort of, I don't know that I've done that sufficiently, but I feel like I'm on that path, and it's a wonderful path to be on. To just find yourself, to explore that. I haven't found myself yet, but I feel like I've enjoyed the journey so far.
Yeah, that's wild. I mean, it really seems like what you're describing is that kind of entrepreneurialism, though universities teach it, you taught it at a university. It's really not something to sort of like academically learn. It's something to experientially learn.
It's funny. I was actually known at the University of Houston for being the professor of entrepreneurship. I taught these like low-level classes, so sophomore classes and such like this. And I was known for, I taught these large classes because, I wasn't like a tenured professor or like this. I was the lowest rung on the totem pole here. And but when I went into class on the first day of my entrepreneurship class, my general entrepreneurship classes, I would always tell my students, I said, look, I know that you're taking this class, but I'm going to tell you that I don't think that nor anyone else can teach you entrepreneurship. My job here will be to help you to learn entrepreneurship by creating and facilitating an environment in which you can do so safely and with a bit of reduced risk. But yeah, I've kind of cringed, and I know you didn't mean it that way, but I kind of cringe when anybody says like I taught entrepreneurship or entrepreneurship is taught or anything like this. It's just no, entrepreneurship might be learned,
Right.
It might be encultured, but it is not. But it's not something that I think that anybody can really teach. It's just something you create that environment, and maybe at best.
And I think it's really important to sort of the premise of the show here, this kind of Carbon Curiosity podcast, is this idea around curiosity and intellectual curiosity, and just sort of this constant drive and interest to sort of learn through doing.
Yeah.
And really having that just kind of constant itch. And so it's one of the reasons why I'm excited that you're here, because you've thought deeply about these kinds of nuances, and we're using sort of entrepreneurship as kind of like a proxy for curiosity, because you really cannot take that step to being an entrepreneur without truly being curious about sort of the world around you and how to make something better and how to kind of improve that.
Yeah.
For someone who's spent a lot of time with entrepreneurs, you've mentored entrepreneurs, you've done a lot of things there. Are there sort of common themes that you sort of bump into in terms of people that you kind of just know, like, they're probably not going to be a very successful entrepreneur, or this individual is going to probably do well because they've got a higher get it factor related to kind of entrepreneurialism?
So years ago, I kind of developed this framework, and it was more about mentoring entrepreneurs, kind of like telling them, like, look, this is kind of how you got to think a little bit as an entrepreneur. But I think that it may be useful in sort of assessing entrepreneurs. Going to your question, I call it the 3 A's of entrepreneurship, and I say that there's 3 A's. The first one is audacity, which I define in this context as your ability and willingness to just continue moving along a certain path despite your failures. And then the next A is awareness, and awareness I define as the ability and willingness to change your path despite your successes. And the third one, sorry, I apologize. Let's start over again on that.
Sure.
So the first A is audacity, which is the ability and willingness to continue along a certain path despite one's failures. And then the second one is what I call adaptability, which is the ability and willingness to change a path despite one's successes. And the third one is what I call awareness. And awareness is really a self-awareness of knowing when to be audacious and when to be adaptive. And if a person has all 3 of those traits, I have found that they can be successful in entrepreneurship as defined maybe narrowly, building a business and such like this, or entrepreneurship even being defined much more broadly. So for example, within a corporation or something like that, right. Or anything, just having that mindset. But I think that that's kind of the pillars of the mindset. In my mind is just that is the ability to express yourself along these in a way that's aligned with these 3 pillars. Maybe that's what I think.
Have you found that there are ways for individuals to enhance those capabilities in themselves or assess those capabilities in themselves? Part of the goal of the podcast is for the audience to kind of be more intellectually curious, to kind of ask different kinds of questions. Is that sort of a learnable skill, or it's kind of like, hey, you certainly have kind of an aptitude to kind of start with, or an interest, or, but just be curious if there are ways that you have seen that kind of enhance somebody's interest or ability or willingness to be audacious, or to drive adaptability, or if it's just kind of a experiential.
I think it's I think that it is, but I think that it comes from at its root, I think that it comes from a place of humility. Sort of it's funny. I find that the people who are most successful in general, but specifically within the context of an entrepreneurial mindset or being entrepreneurs in a narrow sense, I find that they just have, they often have, what is that phrase? They have, oh shoot, I'm having a bit of a brain fart here. I don't know why I'm not thinking of this. Maybe you can edit this out.
No, we will. It'll be all right.
It's called, what do they call that? Shoot, I knew it was on the tip of my tongue.
We can always
imposter syndrome.
Oh, sure.
So I find that these very successful entrepreneurs and others have imposter syndrome. They often feel it. They may not express it, and in fact, they might seek to defend themselves from anybody being aware of it. But I find that they almost always have imposter syndrome, and I think that comes from a place of humility. They're like, well, why am I the best person to be doing this? And one of my best friends called me up. She has been an entrepreneur, but in this particular context, she actually got a job. She was working for essentially a startup. She calls me up and she says, "I don't know, but I feel this imposter syndrome. I don't know what to feel. I don't know what to think. I mean, I've been in this role for a week." And what I told her, and I think this applies to all of these people, is recognize that you are an imposter.
Just
It's
accept it.
just accept it, because it's the height of arrogance to believe that you truly are the best person to be doing something. But the reason why you're in that chair, the reason why you are, in a sense, the best person to do it is because you're doing it.
Mm.
So what I think it requires is a humility to say, I'm going to do this. This is my responsibility. This is my duty. This is what I'm here to do right now. Somebody has asked me to do this, or the world has asked me to do this, and I'm just going to do it. And I'm going to do it for as long as I'm the best person doing it. And if somebody else better comes along, I'm going to step out of them and get out of this chair, and I'm going to let them sit down.
Mm.
And I think that that's where it comes from. And if you have that, I think that you can learn those 3 A's or all the other stuff. I think so. It's about, one might call it open-mindedness.
Mm.
But I think it comes from a place of, yeah, it's open-mindedness, self-awareness. But ultimately it's just, I think, I don't know if it's the best phrase or best term to use, but I think humility is a good phrase to use there.
Very cool. Well, thank you for kind of unpacking some of that for us. I think it's really fascinating, and I think it's, there's kind of you say there's really not a better time right now than to start a business, and there's a lot of people that are sort of thinking about that, and
Yeah.
there's a lot of churn and uncertainty and things kind of just out in the world generally, and so
There is. I will say this, like, we're in Houston, Texas,
Mhm.
and there's a lot of questions around why it's such a large city, you got such a massive population, a large technical population, and why we don't have a stronger, we have a decent, but why we don't have a stronger startup scene
Mm.
here. And I honestly think that a part of that is because we have a fair, the things that our city leaders and the PR agencies and everything like this talk about Houston. Well, it's a stable work environment, that we have a good economy and everything like this. And I'm not saying that to be an entrepreneur, you have to be a software developer. I mean, there's lots of different ways to build businesses and such like this. But as an example, we have a ton of software developers in this city, but they all have relatively cushy jobs working for major oil and gas companies or healthcare companies or whatever it happens to be. And they shouldn't be bemoaned for that or anything
Sure.
like this. That's who they are, and that's what they want and things like this. But I think that a lot of, if you look historically at a lot of these hotbeds of startup innovation and such like this regionally, a lot of those went through economic upheaval.
Mm.
And people were like, well, I have nothing better to do, so I might as well create a
Some type
company.
of external catalyst
Yeah,
to sort of get
something
them
like
out
this.
there and
Yeah.
get them trying.
Yeah. So I agree with you that may be a place where the drive comes from to some degree. But I think that there's also the case that it's not just about Houston. But I think that, when to kind of, sometimes you have to pull yourself out of that comfort zone.
Sure.
And sometimes that something else pulls you out of that comfort zone. But if you want to do that for yourself, I think that you have to just pull yourself up by the bootstraps and just get out of the chair that's the comfy, lazy boy or whatever it is, and then go sit on a hard wooden chair for a little while and say, hey, this is what I'm going to do, because I need to be uncomfortable to be able to create.
Yeah.
Right. And it's in and actually it's funny, because I think ultimately creativity happens, and creation happens um at the opposite ends of sort of the comfort spectrum.
Mm.
That it happens when we're at our most uncomfortable, and it happens sort of sort of necessity is the mother of invention, and these sorts of ideas. And then it also happens when we're extremely comfortable, when we can sit and process the information that we've acquired and such. But I was talking with one of my co-founders the other day, and I was like, "Look, I think that you can do this, and I want you to succeed, and I want to do what I can to support you in succeeding. But I think that you don't need to sit at your desk and work on this stuff, go take a bike ride or go, when your moments of clarity might come when you're on your morning run. And 2 hours later, after we had that conversation, he texted me and he says, "It just happened. I was, walking my son." He's got a small son. He was
Mhm.
in a stroller. He was, walking with my son, and I had that moment of clarity. And so it can come from both sides of that. But I don't honestly think I don't really see it coming in the middle.
Sure.
That creativity, that creation and such like this, I don't see. I mean, for some people it could,
Yeah.
but in general, for most people, I think it comes from one of those two ends
Caught
of
up
the
in the churn
spectrum.
of life, and you're kind of just, you get into kind of a routine.
Yeah.
And I think that's also probably, by extension, a bit of why you see entrepreneurs being very mission driven, because they've identified sort of a passion to kind of motivate them. They've latched onto that thing, and they've had that moment of clarity that sort of gets them up and out of that chair. And so they've got sort of a mission to accomplish. And so I want to kind of steer the discussion a
Sure.
little bit, because I know you're working to solve on a few different things right now. And
Yeah.
so I want to talk a bit about a couple of the companies that you're thinking about, and some of the missions that you're solving for. And so we didn't really talk about which one to start with, but I know that you're working
You
on,
can go to alphabetical order if you want. I don't care.
well, so take us from the top, and kind of tell us a little bit about, whichever one you want to start with, and
Yeah. Yeah.
tell us a bit about the mission. And
Before I get into that, I'll
yeah.
tell you this, and something that I don't think you know, Scott, is that I actually have a couple of binders on my bookshelf at home, that they're large binders, like the 3-inch binders,
Mhm.
and they have just tons of like mostly bad business ideas, like I had a flash of insight at some point or something like this, or somebody said something and, I recognized a problem or possibly, a solution that might be tied to a problem or something like this.
Mm.
And years ago, I developed a template for how to capture some of these ideas. And I put together like a 1-page template that I could literally write on. I didn't need to even like type on it or something like this. So I just printed out like a ton of these sheets and I put it in this binder and I filled it out by hand. I could just jot down some notes or whatever it is. And that
Yeah.
way later on, I'll tell you this, like one of the great regrets. I don't actually have regrets, if you will, but I'll call it a regret for shorthand. Is that I had this? I know I had this what I considered to be a brilliant idea, and I know I called it Pangea.
Mm.
Like the ancient continent.
Sure.
I have no idea what Pangea is. I have no idea what the idea was. I'm sure it was like the
Just the
most
name.
brilliant thing. I just remember that it was called Pangea. And so it was actually after that I created this binder because I was like, I'm never going to miss another one of these ideas
Hmm.
again. And now I think there's something on the order of about 800 ideas across like 3 binders
That's awesome.
at home. And so that's actually where a lot of what I'm doing now came from, actually, originally, initially. One of the companies and the first one that I started of the 3 that I'm working on right now is which is called Solver X. It's kind of a quasi accelerator. Basically, the intention behind it is to work with universities and identify a piece of intellectual property that they have that they think that it could be valuable, but they just haven't been able to license or commercialize because maybe it's in a raw state, something like that. And then what we do is we go find a corporate partner who could potentially use like a final or finished product around this intellectual property. And then we run an accelerator like program with a bunch of individuals who compete on teams and such like this. And then they build a prototype. And then and whatever the successful winning team is, we take that team, we fund them, we incorporate them, we take that prototype, we help to fund it to kind of its commercialization. And it's basically an investment deal for us and our fund. But we do that. Well, that idea actually, I started that company a couple of years ago in a formal sense. And kind of been working on it on the side for a while. I really started working on it this year, but was working on the side. But that idea actually came about something like, I don't remember how, and frankly, COVID has kind of like, I think, changed all of our perceptions of time here
Sure.
and our memories and such. But I think it was roughly around 9 years ago or so, and I was interested in just how universities are commercializing their IP.
Yep.
And I found out, based on the study that I had commissioned, I found out that roughly about 2% across the globe of university held and generated intellectual property is actually licensed in any way, shape, or
2%.
form. 2%, roughly 2%.
By volume.
Some universities are a bit better than others, obviously, and things like this. But yeah, but just by volume, 2%. And I was like, wow, that seems like a real loss to civilization, to humanity, to the universities, And so it took me about 7 years to kind of think through that, and I jotted down some ideas around it and such like this in this binder, and it took me about 7 years to kind of like really kind of think about, and it's actually funny. We were having that other conversation about like being in a comfort zone. I was actually on a bike ride when it finally all sort of came together for me. And even then I didn't have like a business model or business plan or anything like this, but I kind of had an idea of what the actual like
It crystallized.
It kind of crystallized for me. And I think that, so that's kind of one of the things that I'm working on, but that's how that particular one came about. It just took years of sort of like, back burner processing in my brain of what the problem was, and what might be a possible solution around it, and I don't even know if it's the right solution yet, but kind of going back to the conversation we were having earlier, I'm willing to take the risk. I'm willing to go out there and just kind of put out this like unfinished thing, and say, what do you think, world?
Right. Start iterating. There's a real problem here. How do we start chipping away at it?
Yeah, exactly. And then hopefully at some point, somebody will say, that's interesting enough. Let's do it, but let's also do it, and then let's do it again and make it better. And then, and over time it'll be refined.
Very cool.
So I have a team around that now, and they're awesome, and they've really helped to refine it and refine the messaging around it and things like this. So we're actually we've made a lot of progress over the last say 6 months on sort of moving that thing forward. But it's taken years to kind of really kind of, as you said, crystallize, that sort of thing, and kind of come to fruition. So
awesome.
That's one process. But honestly, all three of the companies, and we can talk about the others.
Tell me a little bit about, I know Talent is another one that was going to launch this year.
So Talent is kind of like, Talent's my favorite child, that sort of thing. It's for me personally, I mean, as I mentioned, I had built up this company back in the early 2000s that I sold, but while I have a tendency, and anybody listening to this can probably tell, I have a tendency to kind of have a very academic mindset, or things like this. And my fiance, she's very nice to me, and she very nicely says that I'm loquacious is the words that she uses. But but when I had that company back, and this was in 2003, we were spitting out, like, we had these models and simulations and such like this, but the output of these things kind of looked like that scene in the Matrix, with all the symbols and the numbers and all those sort of things. Like, nobody in their right mind could possibly understand the output, right? Yeah. So we had to create a consulting like wing of the company to kind of interpret and then present these things
people flange up to
clients and turn them into sort of an actionable plan and things like that.
Yeah.
So as part of that, we had this consultancy, or this consulting wing, and it didn't just do that. It ended up doing some consulting work, and various companies. And there was this, there was a startup, not startup's not the right word, a small software company in Chicago. And they called us in to do this organizational design project, a management consulting project. And at the time that we started the project, the company had 30 people. 3 months later, when we finished the project, the company had 50 people.
Wow. Massive
growth in a very short period of time. So the CEO took me to lunch one day toward the end of this, and he says, "Neal, I have this problem. I am trying to, we're growing rapidly. We need to grow our workforce rapidly. And we're hiring a bunch of people. And I feel like these people are very good fits for the job. They're good skills fits for the jobs. But I don't feel like they're necessarily all the best fit culturally and strategically, like long-term fits for us, and what we want to build a foundation of the business around. And do you know of any tools out there or methods for us to be able to hire more efficiently?
Mm.
His name's Jake. And I said, Jake, I don't off the top of my head, but let me go do a little bit of research and come back. So this is 2003. So, Google was a thing, but it wasn't, as big as it is now. Right. So
Not
you had
quite
to
as effective.
yeah. So I went and looked around. I did do a Google search, I recall. And I looked around and I remember it was a Monday when we first had that lunch conversation, and it was a Thursday when we were going to have our next conversation. And Wednesday night, I'm like, well, I guess that's it. I don't have anything. There's nothing to show him or to tell him or anything like this. So I go to sleep, and I wake up the next morning and I had an idea, and I kind of pondered on it in the shower, and I went into his office that morning, and he says, so, did you get a chance to think on this problem? Or do you have any, tools and resources that I could use? And I said, I don't have anything. I didn't find anything, but I have an idea. And if you're willing to give it a go, this goes back to just putting something out there, right? Being vulnerable about it and such like this. And I said, if you're willing to give it a go, I think it'd be a good idea. I think it's something that would work for you. He said, well, what's the idea? And I said, well, right now, you and everybody else on the planet uses a resume. And it's a backward look into what people have done, what their accomplishments have been, and such like this. But there's this joke. I've learned this since. I'm not really an HR guy, and so there's this joke in HR circles that I found. I don't know if it's everybody in HR. It might be the 5 people I've talked to. And so, but they told me this joke, and the joke is that there's an interviewer. And an interviewee, and the interviewer says, so where do you see yourself in 5 years? And the interviewee looks back at them and says, celebrating the 5th anniversary of you asking me that question. And so, but a lot of times in these interviews, it's just an inane set of questions, but really what they want is the same thing. They want the interviewee or the candidate to be able to express what is it that you want to do. And how can that align with what the company's trying to do? And how can we work best to develop the company and to develop the business and to develop you, right?
Exactly.
That and both sides of that conversation want that thing. They might want it slightly differently, but they want it.
Yeah.
And so this is what I told Jake. Is I said, you use these resumes. Everybody uses these resumes, but why don't we just ask them to fill out what I call the forward-looking resume? And I'm not the first person in the world to have come up with this idea. But why don't you come, sort of get them to fill out a forward-looking resume? And what we'll do is we'll structure it just like a resume. It'll have an experience section, and it'll have a summary section and all this sort of stuff. Why don't we do that? And then that way your hiring managers, your HR, your recruiters, et cetera, will have an easy time of reading it because it'll look like something that they're accustomed to, but it'll give the candidates an opportunity to express themselves and also do research about your company and figure out. And what I told him is I said, here is my opinion on how this might work. The content, what they say, will tell you whether or not they're a good strategic fit. How they say it will tell you if they're a good cultural fit.
In terms of word choice.
So word choice, style, et cetera, et cetera. This was the hypothesis behind this. And he says, I love it. Let's try it. So developed a template. He went off and used it. And a month later, he calls me back and he says, this was really wonderful. Thank you for doing this. And then for about 16 years until 2019, I just gave this away. I literally had a PDF, and I was giving it to friends and family, that kind of thing. But then in October 2019, another client of mine, another former client of mine, came to me, and we sat down, and he says, waiter takes our order. We're sitting down at dinner, and he takes our order, and walks away, and my former client, his name is Gary. So Gary says, Neal, I got to tell you something. I got to ask you something. I said, okay. He says, the first thing he said, that consulting project you did for us, that was great. That was good. And we're still doing that stuff. But that forward-looking resume template, we're still using that. We're using it for our employees. We're using it for our hires. It has propelled us to the top of our industry. And I said, well, that's wonderful, Gary. You know, like that's great to hear. I'm really happy for you. And I said, and you had a question? And he says, yeah. Why the fuck aren't you like productizing this thing? Like selling it to everybody.
You across the face, like,
yeah,
come on, Neal.
Yeah, and I'm like, I don't know, Gary. I mean, I've been busy, you know, sort of. And he says, Neal, you got to do this. You got to sell this thing to the world. Yep. He said, companies across the board will need this, and you've got a refined process, refined over many years.
Yeah.
And
a bunch of use cases, a bunch of happy
use cases,
customers,
know how to use it, and know how to implement it, know how to like build services around it, et cetera, et cetera. He says, so he says, you got to do this. And I said, well, I'll think about it. He said, just do me a favor. Don't sell it to any of my competitors. And I'm okay with that. And a few months later, I pulled together a team, which, you know, I have a great team on this, but one of the people that I want to kind of highlight here is, one of my co-founders on this. His name is Michael Powell. And the reason I'm highlighting him in this conversation is because Michael was actually the original co-founder with me on this deal. He's a cultural anthropologist. He has a PhD from Rice. And he has worked as a business anthropologist for 15 or so years, something like this. He consults with companies on their culture, on their experience, on all this sort of things. And I went to him and I said, look, if we're going to do this, I'm going to do it with you, because I need somebody who has, I mean, I have a master's degree in economics and things like this, but economics isn't like a normal social science, you know. It's kind of the redheaded stepchild of social sciences. And so, you know, I said, look, I need somebody who really understands the social science literature. I want to ground this in like data, and I want to ground it in like a solid understanding of society, of humanity, of individuals, and all these sort of things. So help me to refine this. And so that's what we're doing. That's how that came about. So what we're doing is we're taking that tool, we've digitized it, virtualized it, and it's a simple thing. In fact, one of my other co-founders, who happens to be my oldest friend, he used to be the director of workforce analytics at John Deere. And he came down here to be a part of all of this. But when he came down, he saw it for the first time. He saw the tool for the first time, and he's like, so it's just a bunch of text boxes? And I said, well, yeah, but you know, it's what we do with the text boxes that matters. Right. And so that's kind of how talent came about. But what we're doing with that is we've got a tool, which is this form essentially, and then we've virtualized it, and we've got analytics around it and services around it. So we're trying to like take that to market. And eventually, we will do what Gary kind of like slapped me across the face and said we should do, which is to properly productize it, meaning build a standalone product around it, and then, you know, expand on its usage and things like this. And I'll tell you, and you know, in the context of this being sort of about creativity and intellectualism and stuff like this, I will tell you that, and we were talking about mission. And I'll say that, you know, I don't know if it's properly referred to as a mission or as a vision or a purpose, but something around there. That for talent is to enable every person to become the best version of themselves as they see it. And the way that I think that this fits into that is that I want everybody in the world, going back, this kind of goes back to the same conversation about entrepreneurialism. I want everybody in the world to have, I think that there's 4 things that everybody needs to be able to do and become who they want to be. They need to have awareness of the possibilities and themselves. They need to have access to opportunities. Then they need to be able to take advantage of those opportunities. And then the 4th thing is they need to have the resources to be able to do all of that, right? And then and to express themselves. And that's essentially sort of like the approach that talent is taking. Now, we're not doing all of that right now, but eventually the goal here is to build all of that out for, in my vision of this, for every single person on the planet.
Yep.
And I think that if we can do that, I don't care. I mean, people have said, well, wow, that could be $1 billion opportunity, you know? And I'm like, you know, I don't care about the dollars. the success of talent is measured in the people that we serve. So if you told me that we were making billions of dollars, but we were serving 100 people, I'd be very disappointed.
Sure.
I'd also be kind of curious about that, but but or even hundreds of thousands of people, or even millions of people. But if you told me that we weren't making a lot of money, but we were making enough money to sustain ourselves,
Mhm.
but serving billions of people, then that to me would be far more interesting.
Yep.
And that's sort of the goal there.
Awesome.
But as you know, that's that. But the origin story in the
Yeah.
context of like comic books and superheroes and these sorts of things in the world, the origin story of talent was a very, very different one from Solver X.
Yeah.
Solver X came they both were grounded in, I think, the problem, but how they evolved, how they came to be, and what their story is going forward,
Yeah.
are very different from one another. So
awesome. Really cool. We've used our time really well. We've got a few more minutes. I wanted to, so I kind of want to leave it open to you, just kind of open-ended question. Like if there's anything else that you want to talk about, whether it's another company or anything that you want to leave the audience with.
I should probably mention the other company,
because
let's do otherwise my partners in that company are going to be jealous. Or
something please. Like let's bring it up.
So the last one is called Village Insights, and Village Insights actually. So this kind of goes back to how ideas kind of come to fruition, and what their origin story is as well. But it's a very different story. So Village Insights didn't come about. I wasn't the originator of the concept of Village Insights. Sure. I'm not the principal founder, if you will, or anything like this of Village Insights. That person is Mike Francis. Mm-hmm. And if I recall the details of the story, and Mike, forgive me if I got some of this wrong, but Mike was he was in a kind of a technology and strategy role at NOV. And was looking around at kind of innovation management at NOV. And software, innovation management software and things like this. And he's like, most of the stuff out there just isn't great. So after he left NOV and maybe some time later, he started, Mike has if I understand correctly, if I recall correctly, he has a bachelor's in computer science from A&M. And so he's like, I haven't coded in a long time, but I'm going to try to build something. And he started building something, and he took sort of 3 years. Nights and weekends just doing this. And the only person that knew about this was his wife. And then back in late 2019, he approached me, and he and I had been friends, and he just was like, look, I know you kind of understand the business of these things. Could you tell me a little bit, look at this and just kind of tell me if I have something here? I said, well, yeah, I think this is a good start. And I think that it could become something, but here's some things that I think you could change, and here's how I think you could, some ideas around how to build business around it. And he says, great, you want to come join me on this? And I said, I've got 2 other companies I'm working on. I can't really commit to doing this, sort of full time, but I'm happy to help you with it, and happy to help you build a team around it, because that's really what it takes. It's no person can do this by themselves. I don't care. Yeah, I get it. There's the stories of like Jeff Bezos and, him sitting in his garage and, doing this thing. And, sure. But the truth of the matter is it's not one person. It's never one person, right? It takes an entire group of people. This goes back to that humility, is knowing, who you are, what your strengths are and what your weaknesses are. And then surrounding yourself, with people, who can be very effective at that. I know that this is somewhat targeted in the sort of around carbon and energy and such like this. And here's what it comes down to: you need to surround yourself with the right people. And sometimes you're the person that is part of the team that's surrounding someone else, and sometimes you're the person who's surrounding themselves with somebody else. And none of that matters. We all have our role to play. And we all have strengths and weaknesses, and part of so what Village Insights is it's essentially an innovation management platform, but it's not directed solely at corporations, unlike all other, as far as I know, innovation management platforms that are out there. It also has a connectivity, like a broader public connectivity component to it. So It enables, like you can have what we call a citadel
Mhm.
in this like open world environment. So you can think of it how the full connectivity of like a Facebook or a LinkedIn or something like this could be just, seamless digital connectivity across the world, but also allows, and that's what we call the digital mesh, is the term that we use. So it's but it also allows you, for example, a corporation to build what we call a citadel in this open world. So that's a secured environment in which things can happen behind the walls of the citadel. That are protected and secured, and there's privacy and such like this around that. But they can also kind of like let the drawbridge down, and they can go out and venture out into the world, into these other villages, some of which are public and such like this, and converse and collaborate and connect with other individuals that are not necessarily part of the same company. And
Sure.
and that's the idea behind Village Insights, is to do this around these villages, is what we call them. And it's basically just uh, virtualizing the entire human experience, which is, how we build community and how we connect with one another, and the amazing things that can happen as a consequence of that. But our team and how Village Insights came to be was itself a story of a village. Mike Francis kind of had this idea, and he's like in Houston, we had the Allen brothers, and they landed on this like swampy land, and they kind of started building this thing, and what is now, this massive city of 7.5 million people. And Mike Francis sort of had this idea, and he landed on the swampy land of this concept, and he said, but I need other people to can help me with this, and they're going to contribute, and maybe in the end, this thing is going to look nothing like the thing that Mike first built, and that's okay.
Um,
I mean,
but it's a seed.
it's a seed. It's a seed, and so long as we are focused on what the world needs and what the problems are, and or what the opportunities are that new technologies or new social and cultural happenings and things like this can provide for us. What then and as long as we're responding to those things in a positive way, then I think that we'll be okay, and we'll be building something that we're that organization, Solver X, Talent, and Village Insights, we're all very purpose driven, very mission driven. But the origins of those companies are very different from one another. I mean, yeah, they have some common characteristics, such as, again, being problem driven and purpose driven and such
Yeah.
like this. But the actual, like, the path that these things have taken, and certainly the path that they're going to take going forward, are going to be very different from each other and from anything else in the world.
Awesome. Neal, this has been a really fascinating discussion. I
I've
appreciate you
I've
coming
loved
out and
this.
taking
Yeah,
the
this is
time.
great.
And to the extent that there's some information that we can share in the show notes, we'll do that and get people sort of plugged in with the things that you're working on.
Yeah.
Find Neal on social media, connect with him. Great guy. And thanks again for hopping on
Yeah,
the
thanks for having
Carbon
me.
Curiosity podcast.
I really appreciate this. This is great. I'm glad that you're doing this as well. This is wonderful.
Appreciate the
Wonderful
support.
thing. Yeah,
All right, man.
absolutely.
Stay well.
Thanks. You too.
Onward.